Chapter 16. Just outside the city, Kessa sat cross-legged on a large rock. She was admiring the way the sun lit the thousands of tiny crystals embedded in the massive stone wall encompassing Cyrene. Her blonde hair spiraled unbidden down her back in precise golden ringlets, the result of wearing her hair in 3 tight buns the day before. Sunbeams warmed the landscape, cloaking it in radiant hues that mimicked Kessa's hair color. It was a beautiful summer day. A gentle hand touched her shoulder, and Kessa peered up to behold Equestria standing beside the rock. Kessa was amazed at how altered her sister was, for the better. Her uniform accentuated her well-defined muscles, which were broader. Her cheeks were rosy, and there was an unexplainable glow about her. She looked altogether healthier and happier. "Quinn told me I'd find you here. How are you, Kess?" Equestria asked, a tad warily. There was a pronounced silence underlining how brittle their relationship had become, like dried pasta that hadn't been kneaded enough. "I'm sorry, what was your question?" Kessa managed, after rejecting all the snarky replies she'd considered in the last few seconds. "How are you?" Proud of herself for biting her lip, Kessa forced an admittedly tart smile. Although she was hurt and more than a little resentful, their first reunion in such a long time was no time to throw a fit or behave poorly. "I'm doing well, Equestria," she responded, failing to keep the tightness from her tone. Twisting her hair, she rolled it into a bun and stabbed a stick through it to secure it. "I turned 15 a month ago, as you know, or forgot." Equestria's aghast reaction confirmed Kessa's theory why she'd not heard a peep from her sister on her birthday. "Never mind that, though. I know you've been very busy. How are you? How's the training going?" "I did it, Kessa. I'm a full-fledged member of the Cyrenian City Guard," Equestria announced animatedly, unable to restrain her excitement, and fully taking Kessa's advice to never mind about missing her birthday. "Oh, I thought you already were." Frowning at her sister's less than enthusiastic reaction, Equestria elaborated. "Typically, a candidate trains for at least 2 years and then has a 6-month probationary period. But I've done it all in a year." "I guess all those private lessons from the dungeon keeper really paid off. And here all people thought you were doing was flirting with one another." Eyes narrowing dangerously, Equestria put her hands on her hips. "That's entirely uncalled for." "Is it?" Counting down from 10, Kessa attempted to cool her boiling emotions as her sister flung excuses and justifications at her like ice-tipped snowballs. "Methinks the lady doth protest too much." "All right, I know you're bitter about me not being able to," Kessa sensed him. Tuning her sister out, she searched the landscape and spotted him leaning against a wooden wagon that was awaiting permission to enter the city. As soon as she'd spotted him, he gestured for her to follow and disappeared through the gates. Kessa snapped back to the conversation with her sister. "Hard on you, but I'm really happy and I'm done. Now I'm sure we'll have more time together." Clasping Equestria's hands in hers, she shook them up and down elatedly. "Of course, I'm happy for you. Very happy. You've worked really hard and achieved your dream. Well done." Her brow furrowing at Kessa's unexpected attitude adjustment, Equestria gazed in the direction of the gate, hoping to understand what her sister had been staring at the whole time she'd been talking. I love you, sis, more than I can say," Kessa said hurriedly, "but unfortunately I've got to cut our reunion short. I'll see you soon." Seizing her sister's arm, Equestria moved so they were face to face. "I had to follow the rules. It doesn't mean that I love you any less or that I wasn't thinking about you." temporarily forgetting about Thomas. Kessa looked at her for a long moment while she digested her confession. "It's okay, Addie. Really." She saluted her sister and darted toward the city like a dog chasing a meat wagon, calling back, "Congratulations!" Cautiously moving to the secret rendezvous spot, and out of breath, Kessa saw Thomas waiting for her. Without hesitating, she grabbed his face and planted a platonic kiss on his cheek. "Thomas, you dear man, tell me you have work for me." "So, you've seen your sister finally. How'd that go?" Kessa gave him a distinct warning look, clearly indicating she didn't want to talk about it. Holding his hands up submissively, Thomas blurted, All right. "Work?" "Of course. Rhys wants to see you. He's got a job for you. You're going to love this. I estimate it'll take at least a year to complete, if you're good, and you'll be traveling extensively." "Excellent. I'm ready." Thomas led her to where Rhys awaited them. After brief salutations, Rhys swept a hand through his short black hair and got down to business. He explained that a couple of shipping companies, privately owned, of course, in Daisyfield, were suspected of tax evasion. It was Kessa's job to prove it. According to Rhys, it wasn't simply a matter of breaking into a warehouse, counting money, or seizing paperwork. These merchant barons were Akara's finest, squeaky clean on the outside and practically untouchable. They dotted their I's and crossed their T's and swept any illicit activities underneath a very convincing rug. King Cassius felt they had to be making more revenue than they were reporting, and he wanted a covert peek inside their dealings to validate their earnings. To date, no one else had had any success in the matter, as the barons were highly suspicious and extremely secretive. Rhys determined the situation called for time and a certain type of finesse. Kessa fit the bill. She was clever, wily, and young, and if she were caught, her youth would exonerate her as nothing more than a stowaway. No doubt the barons would believe her naive and exploitable to boot. So, off to Daisyfield Kessa went. Nestled between two inlets of the Great Water, Daisyfield was the only harbor city in Akara. Its proximity to Cyrene, a comfortable day's ride, postured it as a central trade hub with Copperrund and Renanin. Trade was conducted much easier and faster by water. With such robust commerce, one would expect the people of Daisyfield to be wealthy beyond imagining. And they were. Once. Since Cassius only cared about lining his pockets, as long as he was paid his due, he allowed the merchant barons to run amok. They exploited the townsfolk and robbed them blind. Gone were the days of shared prosperity. Between Cassius and the merchant barons, the people were practically bereft. Kessa felt honored that she'd be the one to drop the anvil on these crooks, even if she couldn't do anything about the king, presently. Located on a tip of land that jutted out further into the great water than the rest, Daisyfield's harbor was a U-shaped dock that scaled the beach for several meters. Plunked in the center was a row of warehouses, shops, and inns that looked as though they'd seen better days. Unadorned lampposts, empty planters, and vacant benches speckled the wooden planks of the deck, hinting at the splendor that once was. Tourists used to flock to Daisyfield to enjoy the white sand beaches, luxurious inns, and famous entertainment. That was when Akarans had money to spare. Kessa snuck onto the Pastoria, a ship Rhys had earmarked as highly suspect and a possible gateway into the Baron's illicit dealings. It was a beautifully crafted ship that had once transported King Ash himself. For the first few months, Kessa remained hidden, collecting information. The crew was diverse with men and women from all three kingdoms of Nogard. They ran a tight ship, and Kessa found it a challenge to avoid discovery. There were a few close calls, particularly since this was the first time she'd been on a ship. She'd studied layouts, jargon, and ship culture, but nothing could have prepared her for the incessant rocking. Her stomach wasn't happy at first. Luckily, she'd packed plenty of apples, last season's, but still good, which helped a lot. A month later, she'd found great water fortitude and composed a dossier on the key players to watch for. Hailing from Copperrund, the ship's captain was an attractive man, burly and tall, with ebony skin, a well-trimmed circle beard, and short dark hair. Spouting out occasional orders, he'd stand at the wheel, one hand grasping a spoke, the other cradling an ornate tobacco pipe. Early on, Kessa had discerned the importance of that pipe. She never saw him without it, or, for that matter, dates. Honey-coated or plain, he ate plenty of them. The crew adored him, as much as he adored his pipe and his dates. Deservedly so. He was firm, knowledgeable, experienced, and considerate, though the kindest side of him was demonstrated rarely. His spare time, he didn't have much, was spent reading, poring over maps, or playing chess alone or with shipmates. The first mate was clean-shaven, with blonde, shoulder-length hair, which he habitually tucked beneath a green woolen cap. A number of years younger than the captain, Kessa guessed him to be in his early 20s, young for his placement, revealing a good bit about his character. Intelligence, reliability, determination, and competence would certainly be required traits to catapult him above his older, more experienced counterparts. He had an unusual quirk of blinking too often when he was stressed, which was frequent and, in her opinion, unwarranted, but understandable. His work plate was stacked, but he was organized and efficient. Kessa seldom saw him without a pair of black, thick-rimmed glasses that amplified his smoky gray eyes and probably contributed to his excessive blinking. In addition to his first mate duties of navigating, safety, and ship maintenance, he also kept his magnified sight on the cargo, even though there were 2 designated cargo officers. Suspicious, or just a need to know? Kessa had to glean the captain's name, Jetan Covaso, from the manifest because he was simply referred to as captain, but everyone called the first mate Tragor. Out of everyone on the ship, Kessa found him the hardest to avoid. He was thorough, to say the least. Of particular interest to Kessa were the 2 cargo officers who, considering Reese's hunch of profiteering in addition to tax evasion, were most likely to be complicit. The senior cargo officer was a Copperrundish woman who had charmed a percentage, if not all, of the males on board. It was no wonder she was shrewd and funny, with eyes like pools of melted chocolate, rich coffee-colored waist-length hair, and dark copper-tinted skin. To say she was pretty would be an understatement. She was a private person, and Kessa had pegged her as the type with skeletons in her closet. According to the ship's manifest, her name was Mina Kelson. Fulton was Mina's male counterpart. He was a scrawny, dirty blonde Akaran that rarely spoke. Indeed, for the first few days, Kessa believed he was mute. Upon hearing him speak with Mina and Tragor, she altered that diagnosis to selective mute. She'd gone to school with a selective mute, Phoenix. Phoenix was a loyal friend who felt comfortable speaking one-on-one, but not in groups. Some of her classmates had called him an idiot because he didn't speak, but nothing could have been further from the truth. He was smarter than the lot, able to solve any mathematical equation, spell any word, or understand any text the teacher threw at him. As soon as they discovered this, the students showed him more respect, which enabled Kessa to ease off on her protective stance and just enjoy his friendship. She'd lost touch with Phoenix after her father died, but she often thought of him and wondered what he was up to. Like her school friend, Fulton was very shy and didn't interact beyond what was necessary. Because she'd linked him with Phoenix, Kessa had an immediate soft spot for Fulton, even though she was aware that soft spots were inadvisable for a spy. Tar, a greasy deckhand who had an infinity for poker and sticking his nose in everyone's business, had garnered Kessa's attention from the start. If anyone was conducting shady business aboard the Pastoria, it was him. Devious was his middle name. He cheated at cards and, despite his low rank, frequently exploited the weaknesses of his shipmates and squirmed out of his daily duties. Currently, he was blackmailing 2 superior officers who were entangled in a rather spicy secret affair. Kessa knew it was only a matter of time before she caught him in the act of something illegal. These 5 were the key players on Kessa's watch list, though admittedly there were more interesting characters on the Pastoria, including Grain, a burly fellow who helped provide security for the ship, and the 2 head chefs, a man who was referred to simply as Chef, and a woman called Cherry. Kessa was disinclined to suspect either of them. They were chefs after all, the makers of delectable foods that still tasted delicious even from the pile slotted for the scrap bin, where she'd been acquiring most of her meals. Renanin, their destination, had 6 central ports and 2 minor docks, making the one-way route, including stops, approximately 4 months' worth of travel. They were sailing back to Daisyfield when Kessa first made her presence detectable. The Great Water, or by another name she'd picked up from the crew, wrests, were calm, smooth as glass. Given the tranquility, the captain and Tragor took the rare opportunity to play a game of chess. Kessa had perched on a narrow, railed ledge that crept along the stern just below the windows of the captain's cabin. The ledge was designed for rudder maintenance and as a mini balcony. The captain could swing his windows wide and stand there, privately enjoying the fresh air of a beautiful day on the Great Water. It was an ideal location to spy on the captain, too. She was enjoying both a breathtaking view out on the glossy moonlit waters that spanned as far as the eye could see, and an intriguing chess match when something enormous in the water caught her eye. It swam under the ship. There was a loud bang, and the boat tipped alarmingly. "Wrestrook!" the ship's lookout screamed. Kessa heard the fear in his voice. Gripping the railing tightly to avoid being tossed into the wrests, she ducked low. The chess pieces scattered. Captain Covaso and Tragor leapt from their seats and rushed to the deck. The crew sounded terrified as the creature played with the boat like a toy. Kessa held on to that railing for dear life as they tipped and pitched. It wasn't long until she comprehended the crew's dread. A creature the size of the boat swam a couple meters out portside and raised a portion of its body above the waves, though the moonlight did a good job of amplifying the terror beneath the waves. Part crocodile, part squid, and part penguin, the creature boasted impenetrable opalescent scales and a belly of coal-black plating. 2 parallel rows of ivory horns rippled down its armoured back and massive crocodile tail. It had 2 humongous flippers on either side, beneath which were numerous tentacles that Kessa kept losing count of. Its penguin-shaped head almost lent it an adorable aspect, if it weren't for the beak-snout lined with razor-sharp blue teeth the size of her entire body, and 2 huge black orb-like eyes that glinted with a yellow sheen when they caught the moonlight. "We're done for," Kessa breathed, too frightened to speak above a whisper. With a deafening cackle that incapacitated every person on that ship, the Wrestrook spun several lower tentacles like propellers at incredible speed and launched itself over the whole ship. If it belly flopped, it would rent them in 2 or crush them completely, But that wasn't the plan. It dived to starboard. Kessa swore the resulting wave would capsize the ship. It came close. She heard Tragor and the captain screaming for pork bellies to be dumped into the water. It seemed as if the creature applauded the command as it clapped its flippers against its body and slapped the wrests with a couple tentacles. But patience wasn't its virtue. Kessa heard the splintering and snapping of wood as the Wrestrook whacked several tentacles against the boat. It cackled again before diving under the boat and lifting it out of the water. Kessa swore that was it, but then barrels of what she could only assume were pork bellies were poured into the wrests, with splish splashes that drew the monster's attention. Dropping the ship with a cacophonous splash, the Wrestrook expanded its terrifying maw and swallowed the lot of pork bellies. The crew dumped the last of them, hoping they'd be enough to satisfy the beast. With a sound that mimicked laughter, the Wrestrook fluttered a single tentacle above the waves and disappeared into the depths. "Bloody cheek!" Kessa exclaimed, sinking to a crisscross sitting position where she hoped to tremble, cower, and dry off in peace. "I am never swimming in the great water again," she swore. Not one to take time to fully recover from a near-death experience, Kessa swung the captain's window open and climbed into his cabin. She wasn't worried about being discovered, since everyone would be busy tending to the ship or any injuries. She picked up every single chess piece and replaced it on the board precisely where it had been previous to the attack. It was fortunate she'd been paying close attention to the game and had a memory like an elephant, plus several pieces had been eliminated. She tidied the cabin, picking up books, papers, and a chair that had been knocked over. Satisfied with her job, she climbed back out, shut the window, and vanished into the shadows. Her motives were to establish a good rapport with the captain, should she be discovered, which she was beginning to think was inevitable. It might even turn out better that way for her mission. Later that evening, Captain Jotan, weary and worried, finally returned to his cabin. No stranger to storms and the rare attack of a great water creature, he'd expected to have to clean up his cabin. He was the sort of man that couldn't rest when things were untidy or cluttered. Opening his door, he did a double take. Nothing was out of place, despite the turbulence caused by the Wrestrook. Scratching his head, he recalled feeling mortified when his chess pieces had clattered to the floor, and he was unable to do anything about it at the time. "Tragor?" he called. Moments later, Tragor, his glasses askew, his hair mussed, and dressed in his pajamas, appeared in the doorway where Captain Covaso still stood, confounded. At first, Tragor glanced at his captain, wondering what was wrong. He figured the captain had help cleaning his cabin, or that it hadn't been that messy. Then he saw the chessboard set, the way it had been before things went awry, and his face crinkled in disbelief. The captain never failed to amaze him. He wouldn't have remembered the exact placement of each piece if they weren't before his eyes. "Are you wanting to continue our game, Captain?" he asked uncertainly. The hour was late, and it wasn't like the captain to put off sleep, even for a game of chess. "No," Captain Covaso blurted. "I found things just so." "But—" "I know," the captain cut him off. "So I'm not off my rocker. You remember the chess pieces being knocked off the board too." The captain cautiously entered the cabin and circled the chessboard. "Maybe one of the crew." Captain Jotan interrupted him for a second time. "No one from the crew would know where each piece was before our game was disturbed." Raking his fingers through his messy hair, Tragor opened his mouth a couple times to offer plausible explanations. Each time, he just closed it again, dismissing those explanations as improbable. The captain did a brief search and shook his head in complete incredulity. "Perhaps an explanation will turn up in the morning.
Right now, a good night's rest is in order. Good night, Tragor.
Tragor was unsatisfied. The gears of his brain would turn until a logical explanation was provided. But he had to do what he was ordered, so he managed a thoughtful, "Good night, sir," afore leaving. And so they retired for the evening, and Kessa, smiling to herself, did likewise. Until they reached Daisyfield Harbor, Kessa continued to find ways to surreptitiously aid the crew. Whispers of something mysterious going on aboard had circulated bow to stern by the time they'd reached harbor. Waiting until a majority of the cargo and crew were unloaded, Kessa snuck off the ship. The Pastoria wouldn't be departing for a week, so she had time to check in briefly at the stables in Cyrene. Kessa was stroking Celeste's neck affectionately when she heard Quinn's voice demand, "Kessa Decora, where in the kingdom have you been?" She was a little surprised by the concerned angst in Quinn's tone and demeanor. "Didn't you get my note?" "I'll be gone for a bit. See you when I get back? You mean that note?" He rolled his eyes, blatantly frustrated with the vague correspondence. "It's been 5 months at least, Kessa. Master's been asking after you. I didn't—" Kessa cut in anxiously. "What did you tell him?" Inwardly, she criticized her own stupidity. She'd hoped her absence would go as unnoticed as her presence seemed to. Truth be told, after months of feeling like no one other than Quinn cared where she was or what she was up to, she'd come to believe it. Reality was now knocking on her skull. That was a foolish assumption. Equestria was technically finished her training, but Kessa knew, essentially, she'd be busier than ever. Always going the extra 50 miles, that was Equestria. The dungeon keeper probably still kept tags on her in behalf of Equestria, particularly if the rumors of their relationship were true, and he didn't miss much. "The truth?" Quinn replied defensively. "I always tell him the truth, Kessa. I'd be grounded for months if he caught me lying, and he would catch me." Kessa agreed with that. "What was the truth exactly?" "I told him I didn't know and showed him your note." Kessa's jaw tightened as she gritted her teeth. A note with so little information wouldn't have satisfied the curiosity of an apathetic loafer, let alone a master tracker. Did he look into her whereabouts more thoroughly? He seemed the type who'd want as much detail in his report as possible. "What did he say?" "He said to let him know when you returned." Was it really that simple? Had he really let it go so easily? Then she remembered he'd called her a distraction. He wasn't fond of distractions, so it was possible that he'd leave things alone until there was cause for alarm. She clenched her hands in frustration. She didn't really know what Lord Fane would do. He wasn't predictable. "How, pray tell, do I do that? Let him know I'm back?" Simply running into the dungeon keeper was unlikely, and the last time she'd ventured onto the training grounds uninvited, he'd warned her never to do so again. Quinn shrugged. "I'll tell him." "Tell him I have a job. It's out of town, so I won't be around much until it's done." "What job?" "Childcare," she answered. Figuring that Quinn would need an actual reason for her long absences, she'd prepared a believable story during her journey back to Cyrene.
"Will you be taking Celeste? She misses you when you're gone, you know."
Feeling her heartstrings tugging, Kessa frowned. "I can't. The family I'm working for has no stables. I wouldn't have time for her anyway. Could you care for her, Quinn? I swear I'll make it up to you." He shoved his fingers through his brown locks, swaying them to and fro while he itched his scalp. "All right. I hope you get back sooner than later, though." The inflection in Quinn's voice underlined that Celeste wasn't the only one missing her. Maylie's Fane was the only family Quinn had known since his parents' death and leaving his abusive uncle. Kessa had been a much-needed female presence in his life. Since moving to Cyrene, she'd lived in the stables with him and become as much a big sister as a friend. "I'm here for a couple of days, and I will return as often as I can." Quinn seemed unconvinced, but he said, "Okay." Despite his weak protests, she hugged him. "Thanks, Quinn." His obvious skepticism nagged at her. True, since becoming a spy, she wasn't as reliable as she had been. She disappeared at all hours, coming and going at will, and often neglected her chores, a habit that Quinn had to compensate for. She did try to make it up to Quinn when she was around, but the persona she'd been ordered to maintain was as dishonorable as it was unreliable. Such was the nature of a thief. If whispers had reached Quinn's ear, hinting that she was up to no good, good for her. That meant she was doing her job well. But it was difficult to be placed in such a position with those she cared about. In essence, she was the sheep in wolf's clothing. Fellow sheep would instinctively ostracize her. She sighed, hoping her loved ones would accept and love her despite her reputation.